When they came in and they interviewed, he told them, he said, we're going to pay you a good salary. And we were talking about for 33 to 36, 37-year-olds, we were talking about anywhere from 11 to, up to 14, 15 million yen. Okay? He said, we'll pay you that. But you have to be good. And if you're not good, you're out. Okay? Now, we still got guys to join on that basis. Now, the only thing he could have also said was, we also have rules of employment, which allow us to adjust that pay level. And we're happy to maybe even keep you here, but we're only happy to keep you here at a pay level or on terms that we can handle, right? And we'll give you even a chance to improve and to be better again, because everybody has slumps. I mean, that's for sure, huh? Funny things happen to people, yeah.
Just as a follow-up to the previous question, as I understand it, the large Japanese companies, and I do think that large companies are important because in many cases, large U.S. companies who have subsidiaries in Japan, which may not be large in and of themselves, are really competing against the large Japanese companies, and so you have to look at what they're doing. But in the case of the large Japanese companies, as I understand it, they do have performance rating systems, and they would their superiors would regularly look at the employees and discuss with them how they're performing. But that type of information does not get put into the base up at all?
In the largest companies, it is put in the base up to some extent, okay? I mean, to some extent is hard for you to work with, I guess, but it is somewhat reflected. It's more reflected in bonus. But the point is, after about age 32 or 33, then it significantly changes. See, it all becomes quite clear in those large companies. Whoever becomes, say, Kakaricho first, there's usually, a 2 or 3 year gap there. Or who gets Kacho Hosa first? Only 2 or 3 guys, assistant section chief, only 2 or 3 people maybe will get it that first year. So they'll get, for one thing, they'll get their position allowances sooner, okay? But I think it's almost irrelevant because that man is only going to leave that company and join you probably if he depending on who you are, okay? If you've got factories here and you've got hundreds of employees yourselves, that's different. But if you're really small, kind of a seat-of-the-pants operation, that's how we all actually have to start. You'll only get him probably even with a 50% pay increase, right? Maybe more. So, and you're not necessarily going to be able to keep him because now he's in the open labor market, okay? He did his uwaki once and he can do it again. I mean, he cheated once and he left the system. And now, he can work at either GE or he can work at Westinghouse, right? And he can get another good job and maybe more money. So, once you get to that point, then I think you've got to really pay by performance. And it doesn't matter that the Japanese company gives him informal recognition primarily, just gives him titles sooner, but doesn't do that much to his paycheck. That doesn't matter anymore. So in that sense, you're not competing and you can't necessarily imitate what they're doing, while you're still small especially. When you can have bureaucratized career paths, when you can hire exclusively from universities on April 1st, then things begin to change. But it still is comparatively more of an open labor market than it is in the large Japanese employer. So you have to be sensitive to that, and you have to be somewhere in between. You have to come up with the corporate culture and with the reward systems that make the most sense for you. Keep in mind, too, that one thing that Japanese companies try to do when they evaluate people is the role of the personnel department is larger. Japanese employees feel a bit uncomfortable only having their own supervisors evaluate them. So the role of personnel is to talk to other supervisors nearby or to the supervisor and to make check or even to speak with co-workers, okay? But one of the advantages of the big room is that more people are plugged in and they know exactly what's going on, right? Rather than having people in small cubicles. So that is a helpful situation. Also, because you have the large room, you don't even need job descriptions to a large extent. There's people, working in just you've seen how it is, right? The cluster of desks with the kacho there and two people facing on the sides. Everyone knows what they're doing. And there's some good things about that work well in Japanese companies. Because they have bureaucratized career paths, people don't need to take credit, really, and they can cooperate well together. But maybe sometimes in foreign firms you can't let everybody string along. You know, the other three guys at the other desk that aren't doing much, you got to do something for the other guy or he won't be pleased, he won't be happy. Yeah. Anything else? Okay, we might also now look a little bit more at, I'd like to definitely talk a little bit more about the massive staff reduction idea, okay? I tend to say massive staff reduction. What we're talking about is an orchestrated staff reduction, as opposed to working on the problem employer, the designated poor performer, okay? In other words, the troublemaker, the guy who can't cooperate anymore, the manager who is posing a block because he's not quite competent enough, he doesn't have enough horsepower. So I'd like to talk a little bit about staff reductions because, I mean, Japanese companies are doing it now, and just as many foreign companies as ever are also doing it. I think it's extremely important that you don't do it across the board, meaning that you allow all employees to take it. I think that that's very, very unhealthy. And even in the United States now, some major employers are doing it on a non-across-the-board basis. Now, one of the first questions is, but is there discrimination? Let me go ahead and say this. The Japanese practice would be to encourage the good ones to stay, right? Obviously, right? And to discourage maybe some designated poor performers to leave. I would say that the most important point and the starting point is to first not only encourage the good ones to stay, but to tell them that, I'm sorry, but even if you leave at the same time that other employees are leaving, in other words, along with the target dates of the orchestrated staff reduction, you will not be paid the extra premium, okay, the sweetener. Now, what is extra premium? The starting point is the involuntary retirement, kaishatsugo in the rules of employment. That's the starting point. Companies do a variety of things. They have combinations of a percentage of that, like I say, a 15% premium. So they multiply that times 115%, or that times 120, or 130%. Then now the problem with that is, if an employee has no years of service, it's a 30% premium of nothing, right? Okay? If he's got no service, he's got no accrual. So you're giving him really nothing. So what do you do to get rid of, you know, an employee with low service or a younger employee who's not performing well? What becomes attractive then is to give X months of salary, okay? Now, if the salary is very low, it still is not a very attractive situation for that employee, and it's not very much money to the company. So you can also afford to come in with a fixed cash amount, 500,000 yen, 1 million yen, 2 million yen, okay? Or any combination of the three, or even some other ideas are possible. Now, what you have to do is tell the good guys, and this is how TNT has always really insisted on carrying them out. I mean, sometimes clients, you know, have to break from it, but you tell them that even if you leave at the same time, you will simply not be paid the extra premium benefit. Okay? You have a question of discrimination, maybe. Isn't that discriminating? Well, what is discrimination? What's your responsibility as an employer? Right? It's to maintain it's to keep the company financially sound and to keep employment levels as high as possible. Now, if you allow those best performers to take that extra premium benefit and they leave you, first of all, the word will get back that they've got another job because they can easily get jobs, and they're even making more salary, which motivates everyone else in the organization. But furthermore, your very worst performers won't leave you no matter how big the extra premium benefit is. I've really seen this and I've experienced it. You know, the worst performers who know they can't get another job will not leave, even, you know, you're asking them to, whether you're asking nicely or whether you're being mean to them, they won't leave, okay? So, I mean, you can tell those good performers that we have an obligation to maintain this company, to keep them on the payroll for one thing, you know. We have a responsibility to keep the company afloat, and we need you to do that. Now, that goes beyond any argument of discrimination against an employee, okay? And I would be happy to have a client with his corporate counsel take that all the way to the Supreme Court. It just doesn't make sense, right? You've got to maintain employment levels first. That's the most important thing. Don't let the good ones leave, right? And don't pay that extra premium to them. Don't make the premium too great. Okay, but then how do you do the staff reduction? How do you pull it off? For example, we were successful at one bank here in getting rid of 46 people, all poor performers. How did we do it? We didn't offer that much money. We offered more than I wanted, but that's the reality. We had to offer more. But what we did was we told the employees that you either take the extra retirement benefit, the sweetener, you take that. We're offering that to you up to a certain date. But if you don't take it by that date, then from then on, we will have to adjust your pay level. We'll have to cut it back by maybe 20 or 30%. Now keep in mind that if we do that, that is also going to directly, proportionately reduce your lump sum retirement benefit by 20 or 30%, because the lump sum is based on final salary, okay? And you've already been here 17 years, and your accrual is maybe 9.5 million yen. If you set up wrong and you're dividing by 12 and you start from the second year 2 months for every year of service, maybe it's more like 14, 15 million yen. And if we reduce your pay by 20 or 30%, that amount of money also will be reduced by 20 or 30%, okay? So 9.5 million will become maybe 6, 7 million yen. So he looks at all this and he says, wow, what do we have here now? They're not insisting on me leaving, which is my strong legal position. That's where I get recourse. I mean, they just can't fire me here, basically, okay? Because the judge sits on it. The employer has a right to fire here. Article 627 of the Civil Code says 2 weeks' notice to an employee, superseded by Article 20 of the Labor Standards Law, which says 30 days notice or 30 days pay. But Article 27, Section 1 of the Constitution basically says that the nation has an obligation to provide jobs to people. So in the public interest, basically, you should support employment. So the interpretations of the judges in the courts is very conservative. And they rarely admit the employer's right of dismissal. Okay, he's got the right, 30 days notice, 30 days pay, but they rarely admit it. So, okay, so the employee says, all right, they're not just going to dismiss me, they're also telling me that I can have a job with a slight pay cut, which makes sense from any Japanese perspective, either legal or in terms of practice, right? Because you're not supposed to just terminate people the way the multinationals come in and just start chopping heads. That's irresponsible. You just throw money at the problem. If you have that much money to throw at the problem, why don't you keep the people there, rehabilitate them, and manage better? And that's the way the judge sees it. So it can even backfire on you when you offer a large settlement. But if there are still, most people take it because it's so attractive, but there are still 1 or 2 people who don't take it. And they can create, one lawsuit costs just as much money with one person as it would if there were 10 or 15. We've got about 15 headhunters in our company, and I don't want to do too much PR, but we are committed philosophically to taking out of Japanese companies, and that's not anything about, it's got nothing to do with anti-Japaneseness or anything else. There's just a lot more good men there, right? It's as simple as that. And why rob Peter to pay Paul? And it can be done. You can take the best and brightest out of Japanese companies. Why should DuPont take somebody out of Dow? Look, the 2 men right here, Dow and DuPont. Why should they take from each other? It's stupid. And they've both been good clients. What do we, all right? We got about 25 or 30 people in the DuPont, actually. And, we're not about to take, we really try not to take out of foreign companies. And most of those hires were Japanese companies, right? They were absolutely Japanese companies. Top guys that were going to even get on the board of directors. Of course, DuPont's a good draw. Okay, we can do a better job for DuPont than we can for some other companies. But no matter who you are, if you start hiring from us or from an executive search firm, you'll see that magic can take place. When the consultants change their priorities, they begin to move on to companies that are decisive. you know. And the charisma, if you want another strategic tool to help you recruit, one good man in his seat, in his position, that's really a powerful tool. If his enthusiasm and his abilities, and even the way he comes across, you know, as a Japanese, or as a gaijin too, interviewing and so on, his enthusiasm, it's infectious, isn't it? You know, and it's incredible what can be done. So that, especially with passive candidates, you've got to sell on the recruiting side. You've got to sell. Doesn't mean you have to walk on eggshells around the guy or handle him with kid gloves, because if you're not careful when he gets in, he'll start the same way. But you got to be fair. You have to realize that he's a passive candidate. You have to stroke his ego. But I mean, it's kind of a hard, question to answer. But certainly, it's still. I would say that it's easier to take out of another foreign firm. Okay, it is easier. But there's something else that's going on here. If they're already in a foreign firm, they got that big bump, right? They already got the big salary increase. So if we go in and we get some virgin in a Japanese company, and just through sheer numbers, maybe he hasn't been called by a headhunter and so on, we've got room to play with, because even if he's a super cacho, say at age 40, 42, he's probably not making more than, depending on the company obviously, but 6 to maybe 12, that would be even high side, but he could be making 12 in certain companies in certain industries. And then, if we can offer him 15, 16, obviously if he's only at 6 or 7, if you can offer him 11 or 12, he'll come and he's happy, and he's glad to get it. But if you take somebody out of another foreign firm, to give him that kind of an increase, obviously, it's going to cost a lot more money. Yeah. Yes? Yeah. No, Kent, you've got it. And you don't want it. Okay. Right.
How much room is there to negotiate with executive research firms, or recruiting firms rather, as far as if you have a position that you want to fill and it's a rather high position within the firm, to say to several recruiting firms, or maybe 3 or 4 recruiting firms, I have this position to fill. Do they only want to be the exclusive? I'm sure they do, but how do you deal with that when they say, I want to just deal with this exclusively, or I won't handle the position for you?
Ask him why he wants to deal with it exclusively.
Well, it's for his own interest, right?
Yeah. Does he move so slowly that the competition can move in and blow it away? Right? We never talk about that. It's just a sign of weakness. We'll compete with somebody. A good search firm isn't that concerned about that. As I said before, if they're doing good work for you, it's going to be a slap in the face to go out to somebody else, right? But, why the insistence on the exclusivity? So that they can sit on it for the typical industry pattern, they always say 6 to 10 months and all this sort of thing. Why should it take that long? If you have manpower in your own executive search firm and you have the right balance between clients and headhunters, it doesn't take that long, okay? If it does, there's something wrong. More money has to be put back into the business, because it takes manpower resources in an executive search firm to meet your client needs. It's just common sense. So, I would say that you ought to ask some pretty hard-nosed questions on that.
You have a joint venture company here with a Japanese company. The folklore is that the Japanese joint venture partner tends to dump their bad personnel into the joint venture company, and you're stuck with all these bad people. What do you do with those people? Can you get the head office to take them back? Can you rehabilitate them? They're probably there on shuko, so you can't fire them of your own accord. Can you give some comments anyway on how to handle that problem?
Yeah, thanks. It's a good question, and it's a real problem. Let me just say, first of all, that I think sometimes people go into joint ventures for the wrong reasons or negative reasons. They believe that the marketplace is too difficult and they can't get the people on their own, okay? That may not necessarily be true, okay? And it's much more fun, it's more satisfying, fewer potential problems, right? No upset stomachs, more control. It's your baby if you can have complete control. So, you know, I think that more can be done on your own, and that there's been too much emphasis on joint ventures. They are rarely successful, okay, for this kind of a reason. A lot depends on how much your ownership is, which company has a larger percentage, and sometimes even if it's 50-50, somebody, you know, has management control. So I think though that you've got to be you know, tough but fair with your joint venture partner, which means for one thing that you better have